All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is David Gazai, and I am the Director of Member Services and Learning at Orchestras Canada, and my pronouns are he, him. I'm a white male with brown hair, and I have a blurred background. I will keep my introduction short, but I would like to mention that Orchestras Canada is a virtual organization. I respectfully acknowledge that my home office is in Kingston, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. I recognize the importance of this land to the Indigenous people who have lived and continue to live here, people whose practices and spiritualities were connected to the land and who continue to develop in relationship to the land and its other inhabitants today. I invite people to tell us from which territories you are joining in the discussion. At the end of this webinar, we will be answering questions, so feel free to put them in the chat or save them for the end and raise your hand when the time comes. I will now pass the microphone to Christina Lin.
Thank you, David. I'm Christina Lin. I'm joining you from Toronto, Ontario, Tukaranto in the Mohawk language. I'm also joining you from my home office on the traditional lands of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And I just want to say that Association for Opera in Canada are thrilled to be a supporter not only of today's webinar, but as an original supporter of the first two grants to BIPOC Voices, which launched the initiative, and also its second project around recording. The Canadian Opera Repertoire Report is launching in its data collection phase. We're really looking forward to being able to see what a baseline report looks like, against which we'll be able to measure all future work and progress in this area. And I just want to say a final, or just a first word of thanks to Rich and his team of researchers. They're making it so easy for us by being able to accept data in a variety of formats that we have it in. And they're going to be explaining all of that to us this afternoon. So thank you for joining us and learning together.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here with us today. I'm really looking forward to spending a few minutes with you. We'll keep this kind of brief, but I want to talk a little bit about what this project is, what we're doing, and how you can be involved, and actually also why it's important for you to be involved. So just to begin, my name is Rich Coburn. Oh, excuse me, my phone is on, which is weird, excuse me. My name is Rich Coburn. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the director of BIPOC Voices, which is a project which helps people to program vocal works by BIPOC composers. So that's vocal chamber music, orchestral, art song, oratorios, operas, all sorts of things in that sort of ballpark. We have a database that you can find at www.morebipocvoices.com. And we do demo recordings for composers. We do a bunch of other things. We basically try to do everything we can to attack the legitimate barriers to programming, or to diversifying, I should say, our programming. So to talk about what we're doing here today, I want to start by sharing something that I'm sure that most of you have heard, which is this idea that what gets measured gets done. And, you know, when I started putting together grants for BIPOC Voices in the first place, I realized pretty quickly that there was nobody who had measured how much music by BIPOC creators was being programmed in Canada by our opera companies, by our orchestras, by our chamber music groups. That data just didn't exist. And last spring, I was inspired by a report that the Institute for Composer Diversity put out on the League of American Orchestras, which was basically doing the same thing that we're doing here. And I was speaking with Rob Deemer, the leader of the Institute for Composer Diversity, about that afterwards. And so I'm very happy to have him, as well as Orchestras Canada and the Association for Opera in Canada, as partners for this report. Or I should say these two reports, because there's going to be one for orchestras and one for opera companies. So what these reports will do over the course of several seasons, the 2019 to 2020 season up to the 2022-23 season, they'll measure how we as an industry have programmed female, trans, non-binary, and BIPOC creators across our seasons. And I just want to take a moment to point out that none of the data in these reports is going to be traceable back to individual organizations. The point of this is to get a real good baseline and of where we are now, and also to measure the progress that we've already made, and to give us a sense. I know that there are many of you who are with us today who have been doing a lot of work in this area and in other adjacent areas, and I think the tool is helpful in helping us understand how we can do this work better, but it's also very important for us to celebrate the work that we and the others around us have been doing and the progress that we've been making. So those two sort of things, assessing where we can do better and where we're already doing well and should continue to do well, continue to do good work, are the two goals of these reports. Let's see. There are two sort of reasons that I find this important. I mean, I could talk, all day about why I think representation and diversity and these sorts of things are important. And obviously I spend a lot of time doing this, but I want to touch on two that I think are very important, just really briefly. Representation is one, and I know we've all heard that representation matters. I wanted to share, I'm sure that some of you already think like this, but I wanted to share a reflection I had the other day about representation. I was thinking about traveling to different places, to different cultures, like different than my own, and realizing that a lot of the responses that I see when I'm traveling in different places are either like, oh, this is so exotic, this is so cool, or something more like, are we sure this is safe? Maybe we don't understand exactly what's going on here. And both of these reactions, whether they're positive or negative, come from a fundamental understanding that these people are different. There's a fundamental understanding of difference of who we are. And, that is us going into somebody else's culture, somebody else's environment, and I suspect that you can relate to one or both of those feelings. And so if we're inviting people into our environments, if we're trying to get at the inclusivity part of DEI or EDI, whichever way you say it, it's important. I think that framework is meaningful to me, of thinking, if this is how I feel when I go into somebody else's place, because I see other people but not myself, how do other people feel when they come into my place? And so that, for me, I think is just an illustration of why why representation is so important on our stages. That's of course the creators, the conductors, the performers, everybody. And the other thing that I think is really important is diversity of perspectives. We in the arts get a lot of public money, and my view personally is that we have an obligation to have a positive return on investment of that money. And that can be difficult to measure and could also be valued different ways. But one of the things that I think that we can offer to society at large is the opportunity for people to hear people that they're not used to hearing, for people to listen to stories and understand and develop empathy for people they're not used to empathizing with or seeing even at all. And, we have a lot of societal challenges. We've seen how difficult it has been for us to combat COVID, and, the advent of really powerful AIs and, the climate change crisis are not going to be any easier than that, certainly. And it's going to take all of us working together, in really powerful ways, and compromising it and building things with people who we don't necessarily understand easily or even agree with all the time. So this is, something that drives me personally a lot, but I think that we in the arts have an opportunity to tell stories, to invite people into different perspectives. And so those two things of representation and diversity of perspectives are two of the reasons that I'm so excited to be doing this work that I'm doing with BIPOC Voices and on these two reports specifically. So what are we shooting for? It's not for me or anybody else to necessarily tell your organization, what your programs should look like, but I think it's interesting to take a moment and think about the census data in Canada from the most recent census in 2021. And, just to have some baseline ideas of like, what might it look like if our programming reflected our communities? So, obviously the male-female split is very close to 50-50. in the last census, it was the first time that trans and non-binary people were able to identify themselves, and 0.19% of respondents reported themselves as trans, and 0.14% reported themselves as non-binary. So these are very small numbers. But Statistics Canada did say in their analysis that the younger generation, Gen Z and millennials, were 3 to 7 times more likely to report themselves as either trans or non-binary than the older generation. So we can expect this number to grow. Of course, it's never going to grow to be a huge number, but that's, I think, interesting as a baseline of what does our society actually look like. If we look at BIPOC people, here I've made a graph of what the percentage of people are representing who are reporting as, in StatsCan's terminology, visible minorities or Indigenous populations looked like every year on the sort of every second census, and what is projected to happen in the next 20 years. So if we're thinking about the fact that we're programming often on moderately long timelines, I'm working on a project right now that I believe has been running for 8 years. I haven't been involved in it for 8 years, but it's a show that's been in development for, I think, 8 years. So that would mean that in 2 years, we'd be thinking about programming not for a society that is 31.5% BIPOC as today, but it's actually 40% BIPOC. If we look at individual cities, there's obviously some different distributions also, but you can see from this graph here that, while a city like Montreal is pretty close to the national average, Calgary and Edmonton have more BIPOC people, and Vancouver and Toronto have even more, 60%. And again, those numbers are going to continue to grow. So, that's not, of course, about me trying to tell you what I think you should do, but it's just, I think there are different useful perspectives of what are we actually looking at as targets? And then we can start to think, if you're in Vancouver or Toronto, are you performing 60% repertoire by BIPOC people? Do you want to? But, those are legitimate questions, but it's I think, a starting place. So now I'd just like to take a moment and talk about why it's so helpful for us that you get involved. So basically, there are a lot of orchestras and opera companies in Canada, and we're trying to research as many of them as possible. And this takes, for an opera company, it might be 20 minutes or so to research a season. For an orchestra with a big season, it might take us an hour and a half. And so I have hired a wonderful and diverse team of researchers who is doing most of the research on this project. But basically, the more data that we can get from you, the faster we can go through it, and the more in-depth and detailed we can be in our analysis for the report this year. So I'd like to share with you here, all of the information that I'm about to give you here is also available on our website, www.morebipocvoices.com. But I'd like to just walk you through really quickly what the information that we're looking for is, and how you can send it to us. So let's see here. If we go to the next slide. There we go. So for each piece in your 2019 to 2020 season, all the way up to your 2022 to 2023 season, the information that we're looking for is for each work that you've either performed or even for a show that got canceled, but for anything which has been programmed. The title, the composer, the librettist, if there is one, the show dates, the show location, including whether it's online or in person or hybrid, and then whether the work was a part of your main season. And by main season, we mean not including, civic outreach, civic engagement things, education things, fundraising things, special things, maybe collaborations with other organizations where you're doing unusual programming, but what you would consider sort of the core of your artistic programming. And so all of that data, if you have other data like who the conductor was, who the soloists were, the timing for the pieces, instrumentation has been in some, like all of that data you can leave in there. You don't have to bother cleaning any of that out, because while we're not measuring it this year, some of that stuff might be things that we'll actually measure in future years. So, the way that you can send, if you're already doing reporting to the Canada Council or SOCAN or OPAS, which includes detailed, like a season's repertoire list or detailed reporting on your season, you can just share that with us, or you can share any internal document you have, which is a record. A spreadsheet is easier, but a Word document or anything, even a PDF is also fine. And all of this stuff will save us a lot of information. So, the point for us really is to make it as easy as possible for you to submit. So however you can submit things, if you send those to morebipocvoices@gmail.com. And again, this information is all on our website. So more BIPOC, BIPOC voices@gmail.com. That will be extremely helpful to us. The reports that we are building will have then, some analysis of the data that you're sending. And I should take one more moment actually just to reiterate that all the data that you send will be kept confidential. This report is not about calling people out or pointing fingers at specific people. It's really about measuring where we are and celebrating what we're doing and helping us to get really specific about how we can do better. For example, in the Institute for Composer Diversity report, which I'm sure that some of you have seen, they found that while there was an upward trend in programming BIPOC composers, male BIPOC composers were increasing at a faster rate and were programmed in larger numbers than female BIPOC composers. So I don't know if this trend also exists in Canada, but understanding that specific data point as we sort of like break things down helps us to understand, okay, so how can we really focus on, not just doing a sort of general equity, but really making sure that our equity is as equitable as possible. Yeah, so we'll have that sort of analysis. There will be a repertoire list of all of the works which were performed in Canada in the studied seasons by equity-seeking composers. So it'll be a resource that you can use, and you can go and look at things and see other people, pieces that other people have already vetted. And there's also going to be an appendix where we talk about the challenges of creating this report, because there are many challenges, including figuring out how do composers identify, which is a really big challenge, but also thinking about what words and terms do we use and why do we break things up certain ways. So we're going to have a discussion of that, because I hope that it'll be valuable to people. I'm doing a lot of consulting with people to make sure that we do this in a way where the creators feel seen and respected and represented how they want to be. And not everybody has necessarily, budget or time to be spending a lot of time on that specific type of consulting all the time. So I hope that can also be valuable to people in understanding why we made some of the choices we did and what some of the limitations are. And the last thing that I'll say, just in wrapping up here, is that we are not asking you to identify composers who are equity seeking. That can be challenging, and we have a team and a protocol put together to deal with that. So we're really just asking for your repertoire, and we already have a catalog from the Institute of Composer Diversity, a data set of 7,000 or 8,000 composers, including their identities for all the living composers. It's been self-reported, so that's fantastic. We don't have to worry about getting it wrong. For all the deceased composers, it's been researched in detail, and they've identified their research techniques, so we can really trust that data. And so, that's going to save us a lot of time, and then we're also going to be putting a lot of effort into researching the composers who are in that data set. So I hope now that I've sort of covered all of the elements of what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's important that you help us, or why it would be valuable for us to have your help, and also how you can help us. So, we're really, really excited to be putting together these reports and to be doing this for the first time. We're really excited to be able to share this data with you in the spring. And I just want to thank you again for taking a few minutes from your day today to come and hear about this, and would like to turn it over for people who might have questions. If there are no questions, I guess, Catherine.
That's right. So, Rich, I just want to thank you for first of all, coming up with this really important work in the first place. That I think it's positive, it's future oriented. You're making it as comfortable and as easy as possible for extremely busy people to participate. And we get access to not just a repertoire list, which is already a massive gift, but also I think an opportunity to measure what's happened over time, as well as an opportunity to learn from your thinking and that of the researchers that you're working with. You know, we live in a tremendously exciting time of change and development. And I think that the more we do to learn, celebrate, and appreciate, the stronger we'll be as a sector. So I'm so grateful to you for coming to us in the first place to share your idea for research. I'm also just want to underline our thanks to the Canada Council for the Arts for agreeing that this was a timely and necessary project. And yeah, thank you so much for opening this opportunity for our community. And I'll urge everyone on this call and everyone in our community to join in, support your work by sharing their work. And we really look forward to May and to seeing the results of what you've done. Thank you, and thank you to your entire team.
My pleasure, and I'll take this moment also to thank you, Catherine and Christina, for the support that you have given for this project, because, you know, as in all of this work, it always takes, you know, a community effort.